Hello, everybody. My name is Hellkaiser, and welcome back to another one of my music tier lists. We talked about Metallica in the last one, and now I thought we'd hit another member of the Big Four, another one of my personal favorite bands, Slayer. Uh, if you don't know much about Slayer, and if you're a metalhead, I don't know how you couldn't. They're a thrash metal band who are credited with essentially helping form the genre and helping start death and black metal up as well. More death metal than black metal, but there's a lot of that influence in their early work. Uh, their debut album, Show No Mercy, came out like a couple of months after Metallica's Kill 'Em All and helped create the genre as it stands today. Uh, and so they're a very important figure in the thrash metal world. Their last studio album was in 2015, and they're the only member of the Big Four to officially call it quits. As of 2019, they are no longer active, uh, which is sad because I think that they were the most powerful of the Big Four in terms of what they had to say and how they handled themselves in the music industry. They left behind quite a legacy, 12 studio albums and an EP, and we're going to cover each of them and give you my opinions on each one. Uh, so we're starting off with Show No Mercy. When I did the thrash metal debut tier list, I rated this as an A tier album. And honestly, I don't know how to rate as a Slayer album. I don't know how to rate this. I quite like it. I like listening to early Slayer, but you can tell it was put together with a budget of $5 and a couple of pennies. Tom Araya was working as a respiratory therapist, and Kerry King borrowed some money from his dad, and that's how they had the money to record this album. And it kind of shows the production quality is quite poor. Uh, in my personal opinion, it's worse than Metallica's debut, and then, uh, pardon me, and the other Big Four members. It just sort of has this very rough garage band demo-esque sound to it, but it's hard to tell kind of if that was intentional or not because Slayer have always had this very raw sound to them. Uh, there's a lot of standout songs on the album. Uh, the Antichrist, Die by the Sword, Metal Storm, Face the Slayer, Black Magic, and Show No Mercy. It's a fantastic album in terms of debuts. It's up there. You know, some people really. I know some people who really prefer the first two Slayer albums over some of their later work because it's got a much more death metal sound to it, and you can kind of see that in terms of some of the production. But to me, this was just a taste of what Slayer could become. And so I'm going to give it a B rating. Is it a good album? Yes. Is it worth hearing? Yes. But is it skippable in their discography? Of course it is. Uh, we'll get to the one everybody knows and loves. But is this a masterpiece by any standards? No. Is it worth listening to? Yes, especially if you're a fan of Slayer. Next, we get to Haunting the Chapel. This was a 4-song EP commissioned by Metal Blade Records after the success of Show No Mercy, which at the time was their best selling record on their label. It's 4 songs in general. Chemical Warfare, I think, was one of the names. Yeah, Chemical Warfare, Captors of Sin, Haunting the Chapel, and Aggressive Perfector. I apologize, I'm a little sick today. It's a solid EP. There's nothing special about it. I feel like it's some strong songs in general, uh, but it's not anything that you really would be missing if you'd ever heard it. Uh, it's a solid Slayer album. There's not really much more to say. I'll give it a B tier. It's hard to discuss it because it's only 4 songs. Buy it. It's $20 on Amazon for the vinyl, and it's really solid. Uh, Now we move on to Hell Awaits. This was the first time we actually got to saw Slayer shine through with a bigger budget. I need a sip of water. The production was much better. They seemed to have more direction this time. And the death metal influence, well, not influence, but the death metal sound that they were helping create was expanded upon much further. This is, in my opinion, one of the very first death metal albums uh, because it has the sound and it has the lyrics in a lot of ways. Like the opening track, "Hell Awaits," uh, it has a very uh, death metal esque sound to it, and then "Necrophiliac" is a Cannibal Corpse song that they never sang. The song is literally about a man having a relentless lust of rotting flesh, as the lyrics describe it, and ultimately violating a corpse and having his soul sent to hell. Uh, which sounds very much like "I Come Blood" and stuff like that from Tomb of the Mutilated. Uh, the whole album is pretty good. Even there's a song called "Crypts of Eternity," which is sort of similar to the Tombs of the. What did I do? I can't. The Cannibal Corpse album I just said. I completely have lost the title. Tombs of the Mutilated. Uh, Hardening of the Arteries is another good song on here. Kill Again. It's a solid 7-song album. And it comes in at, pardon me, only 37 minutes, which was how much time was Show No Mercy? 35 minutes, so it was 2 minutes longer. But you could tell this band was a band that knew how to create a sharp, tight, very short record. Because when you compare it to Metallica's debut record and second record, how long was that? Ride the Lightning was 47 minutes long, so 10 minutes longer. And Kill 'Em All was 51 minutes longer. So these guys were really going at a blistering pace and really trying to give Metallica and stuff a run for its money uh, by showing you they did 10 songs on Show No Mercy and clocked those songs in at 35 minutes. That's how fast and blistering these songs are. And Tom Arai's vocals sound much better in this album. In the I almost dropped my cell phone. And Show No Mercy, he's got a very screechy vocal style, kind of similar to, excuse me, kind of similar to Neil Turbin from Anthrax. Not exactly the wails like that, but kind of this screechy, screamy vocal. Kind of like if Neil Turbin and James Hetfield were fused together. Uh, his voice sounds much better on Hell Awaits. You can tell he's got a little bit more practice and he's got a little bit more used to playing in studio. And so the vocals sound a lot sharper. Music sounds a lot sharper. The whole band is playing better than they did. You can see a clear evolution. It's like Ride the Lightning in terms of seeing how the band has evolved from a shitty debut album, poorly produced, poor budget, barely know how to tune their instruments, to becoming much better musicians with potential in them. So I'm going to rate this as an A tier album. It's quite solid. If you want to listen to early Slayer, it is the best place to start. Now we get to an album that I don't think anybody's going to make an argument. Rain and Blood is S tier. That's plain. Rain and Blood is, now this is the statement that people argue about, is the greatest thrash metal album of all time. Period. These guys managed to create a record unlike anything heard at the time. But this record came in at exactly, how long was it? Under 29 minutes. 28 minutes and some seconds in there. So that means if he's listening on a cassette tape, it would only take up one cassette side. If I'm not mistaken, on the original cassettes, they just had the album on both sides, so you could just flip it over and start it over again. It proves how they went from 35 minutes to 37 minutes down to 28, and they managed to cut almost 10 minutes from Hell Awaits. And they had just as many songs, 10 songs, as their debut album. So they had 3 more songs than Hell Awaits had on it, and they're still shorter and quicker. And there's not a bad song on this album. It's not even something where you can say, well, it's a little rough or a little raw. Angel of Death, Necrophobic, Jesus Saves, Criminally Insane, Postmortem, Raining Blood. All those are fantastic songs. I didn't mention Reborn and Piece by Piece, and Altered Sacrifices just because they're not, to me, really super stand out. They're okay. But the whole album, you can't deny, is incredible. And even if you don't like a song, there's no reason to get up and skip it because it's very short and sweet and brutal. If it wasn't for this album, you would not have death metal and more extreme subgenres of metal. This kind of took what Metallica and Megadeth and Anthrax and all these other bands like Exodus and stuff were doing and just blew it out of the water. Instead of trying to make a sound for you to mosh pit to and party and kind of have this sort of badass tough guy persona, these guys just came into a room, threw pigs' heads and blood on everybody, and just made this raw, badass record that was just sharp, razor sharp, and honed. People compare Slayer to devil worshippers and stuff, and if they did sell their soul, they sold it to make this perfect album because it is a rare example of a perfect album. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's never got a dull moment on it. It's one of those records where once you finish it, because I write for about an hour or two at night working on my book and stuff, and I'll listen to their whole record through 2 or 3 times and just keep flipping it back over and listening to it because you can't get enough of it. Metallica, especially in their later years, have started making their songs longer, and a lot of the times they could use a lot of the fat trimmed off. Songs like the Judas Kiss and what else can I think of off the top of my head here? Uh, Most of the Death Magnetic album could use like a minute or two taken off. Some Kind of Monster from Saint Anger. Most of the songs on Saint Anger could just be cut down, and they would have been better songs because they didn't overstay their welcome as long. And Slayer just sort of showed the world how to make a lightning fast album, but make it where you want to hear it again. You want to keep hitting repeat. You want to keep flipping the cassette over. You want to keep putting the needle back down on the record because it never lets up and it's super intense. Now we move on to South of Heaven. This is an interesting change of pace for a thrash metal band. Uh, Most people would take the success of Rain in Blood and say, you know what, I'm going to release an album. I'm going to put out a couple of singles that sound just like Rain in Blood and just do my best to ride that success and hope that the fans mostly like it and just keep doing what I'm doing. Just keep putting out the same album as long as I can. Uh, and instead, Slayer just looked at themselves and said, we're never going to be able to create a second Rain in Blood. So how about we slow it down and just get heavier? And that's what they did. The opening title track, South of Heaven, is much slower. It almost feels like, you're moving in slow motion compared to Rain in Blood. But it's a fast song, and it's hard to explain to somebody just how quick it is. Because it's not like they slowed down. They just went to, like, normal speed compared to warp speed. And the results was incredible. It's not like heavy and like when you think of like Metallica, The Thing That Should Not Be, or the Black Album. It's still thrash metal all the way through, but it's heavier songs with more of a lyrical meaning behind them rather than just headbanging and heavy guitar solos and stuff. Uh, the standout tracks is this title track, South of Heaven, Live Undead, Mandatory Suicide, which is an excellent anti-war song, a protest song, and Spill the Blood. But the whole album is extremely tight. This was also the first Slayer album to feature a cover with dissident Aggressor. I'm sorry, uh, which was a Judas Priest cover. Not the first time they would do any covers. Next we get, and by the way, it's staying at S tier. It is a masterpiece of an album. Next we get to Seasons of the Abyss. Now most bands would start to run out of steam because you made two perfect albums back to back, and at this point the '90s is coming around. Thrash metal is starting to lose a lot of its luster, uh, and most people would start panicking. You look at Metallica, and the following year after this album came out, uh, they had already decided they're going to switch genres. Uh, After '91, a lot of bands started experimenting a lot more, like Megadeth with Euthanasia, and Testament with Demonic, and even Slayer would go on to experiment. But this was them just violently saying that thrash is still here to stay, and taking the best of their last two albums and combining it. You have fast thrashers like War Ensemble and uh, Blood Red and Born of Fire and stuff like that. Then you have slower songs such as Dead Skin Mask and Sessions of Fire and Skeletons of Society. So it's kind of a best of both worlds, almost like what some bands would put out as a greatest hits album. Uh, you have that balance between the thrash, anthems, and the slower, kind of almost ballad-like songs. The very hauntingly beautiful Dead Skin Mask about I can't remember the serial killer's name, but it was about a serial killer. And one of the first times that Slayer started to show a interest in serial murders. Well, not the first time. That would be Angel of Death, but their budding uh, interest in serial murderers and stuff. And it was an incredibly solid album, and managed to show that the thrash metal was still here to stay. It's an S tier album. I've never seen a band other than Metallica put out three perfect albums back to back, and make the styles different. The thing about Metallica is, they've made never a bad album, but they've changed styles so much. Slayer managed to make three albums within the same genre wildly different, and you got to give them credit for that, because there's not many bands that could work that large difference in styles like Slayer did. Because Seasons in the Abyss is 42 minutes long, so it's a bit longer than Rain and Blood, quite a bit longer by comparison. And South of Heaven's 37 minutes long, so both records are longer, but they don't feel long. They still feel very short and sweet, and not really much, if any, fat at all on the albums, and they're extremely well produced. Rick Rubin really knew what he was doing with these guys' work. He took a band that had potential and sharpened off their edges and trimmed off their fat and made them into a killing machine. And you can't deny that their work through the 80s and 90s was immaculate. Now we get to Divine Intervention. This was their first album without Dave Lombardo behind the drum kit. He'd been wanting to leave for quite a while. In fact, he left shortly after Rain and Blood, or during the making of Rain and Blood, or something like that, and was convinced by his wife and Rick Rubin to rejoin the band. Well, finally, he severed ties, and so they replaced him with, I don't want to say his name wrong, Paul Bostaph. And we got an album that a lot of people say would have been better if Lombardo was behind the drum kit. Personally, I don't think it's a bad album at all. I think it's a classic Slayer album. Some people say this is them trying to recapture Rain in Blood. I personally disagree with that statement. It's just Slayer being Slayer. At this point, grunge was on the rise, nu metal was on the rise. This was '94. And instead of trying to do anything different, they just stayed them. Uh, there wasn't really much more you could say. It's a Slayer album. Uh, has some great songs on it: "Killing Fields," "Ditto Head," "Divine Intervention," "Serenity and Murder," and the excellent Jeffrey Dahmer inspired uh, 213, which is my personal favorite song off the album. It just the lyrics just capture Dahmer to a T. Driving compulsion, morbid thoughts come to mind, sexual release buried deep inside, complete control of prized possession, touch and fondle without no objection. Uh, Death, love's final embrace, your cold tenderness. I need a friend, please be my companion. I don't want to be left alone with my sanity. You could tell that, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was Araya that wrote this. Araya wrote the lyrics. And in my opinion, he did his homework. Because I like studying serial killers myself. I find it interestingly morbid. Uh, and you could tell he's done a lot of reading. He listened to his interviews, and he really crafted. I don't want to call it a tribute because you can't call that a tribute. It sounds weird, but just like with Dead Skin Mask, it's an excellent retelling of the events of these psycho murderers that did terrible things to people and showing their sins to the world. Because some people might not know about these killers, and then think that if you're not thinking right, you think that they're praising them, and they're not. They're showing you what they did, and it's sickening. Uh, what these people have done and what they did, and they deserve their fate. Even Dahmer himself believed he deserved to die. Uh, Now we move on to Undisputed. Oh, I forgot to rank it. Overall, I like the album, but it's not really nothing. It's unlike the first three albums that are S tier. There's not really nothing stand out about it. Uh, I can't name a specific song off this that I really truly liked or anything that could be a single off the album and stick out. I've always said Slayer makes albums, they don't make singles. The whole album either is good or it's not. And in this case, it's just average. It sounds like Slayer, but it doesn't sound like they've done anything. For the first time in their career, they went backwards. Instead of slowing it down like Rain and South of Heaven did as a follow up to Rain and Blood, or mixing the two like Seasons of Abyss did. It just decided we're going to be just go back to Hell Awaits and Rain and Blood and try to just make a fast thrash album and just do what we want to do. Uh, and so in that case, I'm going to rank it A tier. There's nothing bad about it. There's nothing particularly good about it. Uh, it's a solid album. If anything, I'd say it might be B tier. It's just like I said. It's hard to rank it as bad because it's not bad. Now we get to Undisputed Attitude. This was 1996. This is essentially just a cover album. There is two songs that were done by Jeff's side project band Pap Smear, and there's one new song written for the album called Gemini, and this is starting to see where Diablos, uh, this is the budding edges of that kind of new metal sound on that Gemini song. But the most of the covers are punk influenced albums. Uh, so let me pull them all up here. I know that there's DRI songs, which I'm not a big DRI fan. Uh, where is Undisputed Attitude? There it is. Verbal abuse, abolish the government, can't stand you, the damn, guilty of being white, I hate you, filler, I don't want, I don't, I don't want to hear it, spiritual law, Mr. Freeze, violent pacification, Richard hung himself, I'm going to be your god, and Gemini, and a couple others I didn't mention. To me, this album's just been okay. Like, I'll pop it on and I'll listen to it, but it doesn't do it for me. It's kind of like Divine Intervention. Is it alright? Yes, but is it anything perfect? No. And it feels like they kind of were just out of ideas. They really just didn't know what to do anymore. because they kind of had done everything in thrash you could do. They were really just limited. You know, you've done the fastest album, you've done the heaviest album, you combine both of them, you've just done another thrash album. What more can you do? And I kind of understand that, you know, the well was starting to go dry here. So is it an okay album? Yes, but is it anything perfect? I feel it's Slayer's weakest work. Uh, it just, you know, it seems like they wanted to write their own music, and then just somewhere along the line they gave up and just decided to make it mostly a cover album, which kind of feels sad. Like I said, it just seems like the creative well was running dry. So I'm going to put it at C tier. It's their worst album. Now we get to Diablos and Musica. This was Slayer's first non thrash metal album and their only non thrash metal album. Uh, I'm not counting the cover album because it does have at least their brand of punk on it, and punk kind of helped invent thrash, so it puts me at a weird uh, place of where I should rate Undisputed Attitude. I'm going to say it's a cover album. That's just how I'm going to refer to it. I'm not going to say it's a thrash album or not. Anyway, Diablos and Musica is more groove metal and new metal. It's got a lot of groove influence to it. This was them trying to fight back against Pantera and all these other bands that were rising up, Slipknot and stuff like that, and trying to kind of find their place. Now, like I said, the well was running dry in terms of ideas uh, in thrash metal, so they just wanted to try to experiment. And the first two songs, Bitter Peace and Death's Head, are pretty solid. Stain of Mind is pretty good too. But after the first three songs, the album goes incredibly downhill. Uh, my mouse will stay still. Overt Enemy, Perversion of Pain, Love to Hate, Desire, In the Name of God, Scrum, Screaming from the Sky, and Point are all just average to below average new metal groove songs. Are they okay? Yeah. Are they stand out? No. If I wanted to listen to new metal, I'd put on a Slipknot album. I'd listen to Pantera or something. Uh, this just is not really my cup of tea. I don't think this album's really for anybody. I think it was them trying to find an audience at a time when thrash metal was dead, and they were clearly struggling to figure out what they could do with their stylization. And it just, to me, it hurt them. They changed their iconic Slayer logo to this weird kind of runic looking symbol. They had a strange, creepy looking man in looks like corpse paint standing there, and it's not really good. That's all you can say about it. It was an interesting experiment. At least they didn't try to go commercial. Slayer never went commercial, and you got to give them props for that. Uh, they only stuck within heavy metal, and at least they never wanted to try to pull a Metallica or a Megadeth and try to go mainstream. You know, if the people found them, they found them. If they didn't, they didn't. But that doesn't excuse the fact this is just a poor album in general. Also, it's one of their longer albums at 41 minutes. So they were extending their time, and they were just making weak songs. Is it okay? Yes, but nobody on God's green earth is sane is going to rate this as an A tier or even a B tier Slayer album. It is C tier. It's not D tier because the first three songs are alright, but honestly, if it wasn't for the first three, which is Bitter Peace, Death's Head, and Stain of Mind, they're the only songs that hold this album up. I'd put it in D tier. But it manages to, at least because it's Slayer too, it's not bad. It's just like somebody took their razor sharp edge and dulled the blade. So it still cuts. It still manages to eviscerate you. It just doesn't do it as quickly, and it doesn't do it as sharp and precise. Now we move on to God Hates Us All. This album is interesting for the reason it released on 9/11. I believe that was a Tuesday. I'm not good with dates and stuff. Uh, and that was the day at that time that new music came out, and the title seemed to be very fitting for what happened on that day. Uh, the album itself is a return to form, and it's one thing I got to give Slayer credit for. They immediately listened to fans saying that this didn't sound like them, and they got right back on track. Again, Metallica and stuff should have taken a note from Slayer's book. Uh, the whole album clocks in at 43 minutes, which is getting a little bit longer. But you got 13 songs. See, at this point, you have the most songs off of any Slayer album. So it's their longest album to this point, and for the most part, it is incredibly solid. It's also the first time that a Slayer album opens on an instrumental, which is "The Darkness of Christ." Which is not really an instrumental. It's kind of like news programs and stuff, sort of electronic sound playing. It's not my favorite. Then you get into some great songs, Disciple, in which you wonder how Araya is breathing, God Send Death, Threshold, Bloodline, which is my personal favorite on the album. Uh, There's some songs on this that's a bit average. I find the overall product to sound a lot like Divine Intervention. Good, but I can't really pick out many parts of it I really truly like. Disciple is a fantastic opener for the album. It's Kerry King talking about how much he hates religion, but it's very solid. It's got a good breakdown section where you get to hear Rise bass solo, and it's got some great lyrics. As I've gotten older, I've really appreciated the "I hate everyone equally" uh, line of the song, and it's impressive just how angry Araya sounds on this album. It's like he's got his fire lit back under him, and you can just feel that hatred and that energy seeping off the record as he's screaming, "God hates us all." And then we get to Bloodline, which was a much slower song. It's like they finally started, instead of, if you got to copy an album, copy Seasons of the Abyss. Because we went from a thrash anthem with Disciple to a slower, heavier, South of Heaven style song with Bloodline, which was written by Araya and kind of like a vampire themed song about this immortal murderer. And it's a really good song. My personal favorite. I love the music video for it. I love the opening with the drum opening, that boom 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 boom. I don't know exactly what you call that, but it sounds badass, and I love that opening. So overall, I'm going to rate it as an A-tier album. It was the step in the right direction that brought Slayer back to the top. Now we go to Christ's Delusion. In 2006, we saw the return of Dave Lombardo due to Paul Bostaph. I hope I'm saying his name right. I think he had a knee or an elbow injury, or possibly both, that caused him to temporarily have to step off the throne. And so Lombardo came back, and a lot of fans received this album a lot better, and they credit Lombardo with bringing back the sound, and this was a very successful Slayer album. To me, this is the best thrash album of the early 2000s. This was 2006 best thrash metal album according to the thrash metal Reddit subreddit, and I can see why. The whole album has this ferocity to it. It takes that fire, like I said, that was lit under Araya during the making of God Hates Us All, and just cranks it up. The opening song, Flesh Storm, is just a flurry of notes. Skeleton Christ is a fast, frantic song. Eyes of the Insane was a Grammy-winning song about PTSD and soldiers with an amazing music video. Truly one of the best music videos I've ever seen. Nothing flashy, not a bunch of special effects or trying to tell a poignant story. it's all done just by showing reflections in a soldier's eye, and it's fantastic. If you've never seen the YouTube video for it, look it up. Then you get, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Jihad, uh, which is essentially a terrorist point of view of 9/11. And then you get uh, Colt, which is another really fast song. At certain points on this record, I was thinking, good Lord, how does Araya take time to breathe? He's really just moving at a fast rate through the songs, which gives him this urgency about him. And with Lombardo back on the drum kit, there's a bit more emphasis on some of his double kick, which is one of the best ever done, if not the best. There's a reason they call him the Godfather of the double kick. And while I don't think that he's the reason for this album's success, I think it's just Slayer had taken the direction, because Blood God Hates Us All got nominated for like 1 or 2 Grammy Awards and won one for Disciple. I don't know if it did for Bloodline, but I know that it was a step in the right direction, and they just stepped further in the right direction. Uh, and so it's a really solid album. Does it stand up to their masterpieces, which were their first 3 big things? No, but is it a better album than anything that Slayer has put out since 1990? Yes, it was their best album since Season in the Abyss, so it is S tier. Though these 4 are the most essential Slayer albums you'll listen to. Now we get to World Painted Blood. This would be Jeff Hannum's last record with Slayer. He unfortunately passed away, I believe it was in 2011. And he went out on a high note. World Painted Blood, Hate Worldwide, uh, Playing with Dolls, and Psychopathy Red. I was trying to remember if it was Psychotic or whatever. Psychopathy Red were all fantastic songs. Again, it's just a fast-paced Slayer thrash album. They've given up on trying to make anything revolutionary, and they're just making solid albums, and it is incredibly solid. It sounds great, and Lombardo's behind the drum kit, and everybody's got their time to shine, and it really does have some good, memorable moments on it. Is it the best Slayer album in the world, though? No. Is it a return to form like God Hates Us All and Christ Illusion? No, it's just a solid album. So I'm going to put it at A tier. Nothing wrong with it. It's just not their best. It's not their worst. Now we move on to the very last album of Slayer, Repentless. At this point, Jeff was replaced by the equally as talented guitarist Gary Holt from Exodus, and this was his first and only album with the band. Lombardo had departed in 2013 from the band and was replaced again by Paul Bailoff, not Paul Bailoff, Paul Bostev, Bostev. I hope I'm trying to say the name right. And this would end up being Slayer's 12th and last studio album, which they had another one that was in the works but was canceled. And in my opinion, if you got to go out, they went out on a high note. Delusions of Savior is one of the best instrumental openings to any thrash metal album. I truly love it. I listen to it almost as much as I do the album, if not more. It's a really good instrumental. It's like what was that Testament one from 2008? The Formation of Damnation for the Glory of. It's like that one. It's a really good, short but sweet instrumental that leads into a heavy, frantic, fast-paced song, Repentless. Arai's voice has started to change a little bit throughout the course of his career, but this time it really has this kind of higher-pitched sound to it, kind of reminiscent of his early days. And it starts off really good. This is Jeff's one and only writing credit on the entire album, and you could tell this was a tribute to their fallen comrade. A lot of the lyrics seem to just tell the story of Slayer, such as I hate the life, hate the fame, hate the fucking scene, pissing match of egos, fuck their vanity. Uh, what you get is what you see, live fast on high, repentless, let it ride. My songs relive the atrocities of war, can't take society any fucking more. Intensity, anarchy, hatred amplified, playing this shit is all that keeps me alive. I leave it all on the road, leave it on the stage. This is my life where I kill it every day. I'll be beating this guitar to the day I die. And it sounds like Kerry King and Jeff and the whole band just giving their last hurrah of how they wanted to go out. And it is a fantastic song, but it's not the only good song on the album. Implode, Chasing Death, You Against You, Pride and Prejudice are all really good standout out. It's not a bad album at all. There's not really a slow point on it. It's fantastic. It's got a lot of groove to it. It sounds great. Uh, Arai's voice still sounds good. Gary Holt is an extremely competent guitar player, one of the best in the world, and his solos are really good. He didn't have any writing credits on the album other than his solos, which I feel like if they let him do some writing with them, and I hope that on the follow up album he would have gotten the chance to do some writing, I think it would have been even better. And ultimately on Persona Non Grata, which was the Exodus album, uh, Prescribing Horror does sound like the song that he probably would have put on the next Slayer album. I really, really like it. Uh, it's the one and only album they did in the 2010s era, and it's it and Christ Delusion are the best albums they put out in the 2000s. Period. Uh, I debate whether or not to put it S tier or A tier. I truly, truly liked it, but does it stand up? It's not. It and Christ Delusion can't stand to Rain in Blood, South of Heaven, and Seasons of the Abyss. But are they great albums? Yes, they are. Are they above average for other bands of the genre? Yes, they are. So does it deserve to be included in S tier? In my opinion, yes, it does. It's a great album. Like I said, Slayer is one of the few bands that never really have made a really bad album, something that really stands out as a stain upon their discography. Uh, they've made kind of what I call some mistakes by not really trying to experiment a little further within the boundaries or try to make shorter, faster albums, though more. I don't know how to. They should have tried to combine that slower. If anything, they should have just kept making Season of the Abyss and making slow songs combined with some fast thrash anthems, and they could have kept copying off that because that's what God Hates Us All is. It sounds very much like Seasons of the Abyss, and if they'd done that a little bit more, uh, I think Divine Intervention would have been better sold. And while World Painted Blood is just not bad, it's not the best. It's all average. I feel like it was lacking anything. It was lacking something compared to what Repentless has. So I'm leaving Repentless at S tier. So anyway, that was my tier list. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I've enjoyed making these. They're a lot of fun to make. I will do one for Megadeth and for Anthrax at some point. I need to listen to some more Anthrax. I've not listened to a lot of the post Belladonna years. John Bush, I believe, John Bush was the singer. And I want to listen to some of that era and come up with an opinion of it. I need to re-listen to some Megadeth albums because there's a lot of the 2000s albums that I just haven't heard in a while. Want to re-listen to Endgame and Super Collider and 13 and stuff like that, and United Abominations to kind of get my opinion on those. And then I'll make those tier lists. Then we'll do the best albums from 86 to 88, which that's going to be a long list because there's a lot of albums released in that period, and there were some great albums in that time period. So I hope you guys have enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your evening.